The rain fell hard that Tuesday afternoon, turning the busy streets of Westbrook into rivers of umbrellas and hurried footsteps. Among the crowd, a small figure darted between people, trying his best to stay dry. Noah Thompson, just 12 years old, had no umbrella, no raincoat, and nowhere to go until the shelter opened at 6. His brown hair stuck to his forehead as he looked up at the fancy buildings lining Main Street. Most shops had already shooed him away. A kid with no money wasn't welcome to just hang around. Noah's sneakers, held together with duct tape on one side, splashed through a puddle as he ran across the street, making his already wet socks even soggier. Up ahead, the golden lights of the Grand Palace Hotel glowed through the gray downpour. Noah had passed by many times but never dared go inside. Today, though, the rain left him little choice. He hesitated at the revolving doors, watching men in expensive suits and women with designer bags spin through with confident ease. Just for a few minutes, Noah whispered to himself. Just until the rain lets up a bit. He slipped into the revolving door, pushing it slowly, worried that someone might stop him. But the doorman was busy helping an elderly couple with their luggage, and Noah made it into the lobby unnoticed. The warmth hit him first. After being cold and wet for hours, the heated air of the hotel lobby felt like a hug. Noah stood still for a moment, dripping on the polished marble floor, taking in his surroundings. The Grand Palace Hotel wasn't just a building, it was another world. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings. Soft music played somewhere in the background. The furniture looked too clean to sit on, and Noah was too wet to try. People in the lobby spoke in quiet voices, some typing on laptops, others sipping from delicate cups. A cleaning lady glanced his way, and Noah quickly pretended to be waiting for someone, trying to stand a bit straighter, trying to look like he belonged. He moved toward a large potted plant, hoping its leaves would hide him a little. From his new spot, Noah could see more of the lobby. At the far end, near tall windows that looked out onto the rainy garden, stood something that made his heart skip. A piano. Not just any piano, but a grand piano, its black surface so shiny it reflected the chandelier lights like stars. Noah forgot about being wet. He forgot about being cold. He forgot about the hole in his shoe and the hunger in his belly. All he could see was that piano. Music had always been Noah's escape. He couldn't explain why or how, but sounds made more sense to him than people did. Back at the shelter, Mrs. Winters had an old radio that sometimes worked, and Noah would sit beside it for hours, soaking up whatever music came through. Sometimes on his way to school, he'd take the long route past the Westbrook Music Academy, just to hear the students practicing through open windows. He'd never touched a real instrument himself. The school he attended when he wasn't moving between shelters had cut its music program years ago. Once he'd made a paper keyboard and practiced pressing the keys while humming the tunes he remembered. Noah didn't realize he had moved until he was halfway across the lobby, drawn to the piano like it had its own gravity. He stopped several feet away, knowing he shouldn't get closer. A man sat at the piano, playing something soft and gentle that Noah recognized from the classical station Mrs. Winters sometimes tuned into. The man wore a hotel uniform with a name tag. His fingers moved across the keys like they were having a conversation with them, light and easy. Noah stood there, watching, forgetting that his clothes were dripping onto the carpet. His eyes followed every movement, his ears caught every note. Without realizing it, his own fingers began to move at his sides, copying the pianist's patterns in the air. The music stopped. The hotel pianist checked his watch, closed the piano lid without locking it, and walked away, heading toward a door marked "Staff Only." Noah guessed it was time for his break. For a long minute, Noah just stared at the now silent piano. The lobby had grown busier as more people came in from the rain. A group of business people gathered near the check-in desk. 2 bellhops hurried past with luggage carts. No one paid any attention to the small wet boy standing alone. Noah took one step closer to the piano, then another. His heart pounded so hard he thought everyone must hear it. The closest he'd ever been to a piano before was pressing his face against the music shop window downtown, watching the keyboards on display. "What are you doing in here, young man?" Noah jumped at the stern voice behind him. A woman in a black suit looked down at him, her eyebrows raised. She had a hotel badge clipped to her jacket. I was just... Noah stammered, his voice small. "Are you waiting for someone?" The woman asked, her eyes taking in his soaked clothes and worn-out backpack. My mom, Noah lied, hating himself for doing so. She told me to wait here while she talks to someone about a job. The woman's face softened slightly, but doubt remained in her eyes. Where is she now? Noah pointed vaguely toward the hallway leading to the hotel offices. Over there. She said she wouldn't be long. I see, said the woman, though she clearly didn't believe him. Well, perhaps you should sit down while you wait. There's a chair over by the wall. She gestured to a spot far away from the piano and from the other guests. Thank you, Noah mumbled, and headed in that direction, his shoulders slumped, the piano dream fading away. But halfway to the chair, Noah heard a commotion at the front desk. The woman who had spoken to him hurried over to help with what looked like a large group checking in. Several families with kids and luggage had arrived all at once, and suddenly the lobby was filled with noise and activity. Noah glanced at the exit. The rain was still coming down hard. He looked at the chair he was supposed to sit in, then back at the piano, now unattended and unwatched. Before he could talk himself out of it, Noah changed direction. His wet sneakers made no sound on the thick carpet as he approached the piano. No one called out to stop him. No one seemed to notice at all. Up close, the piano was even more beautiful. The black surface was so perfectly polished that Noah could see his own reflection. His too long hair, his thin face, his wide, nervous eyes. He reached out a hand, then pulled it back, suddenly afraid. What if he got in trouble? What if they called the police? What if they called child services again? But then, what if he never got another chance? Noah looked over his shoulder. The staff were all busy with the new arrivals. The hotel guests were occupied with their own conversations. The pianist was still on break. With trembling fingers, Noah lifted the lid. The white and black keys seemed to glow under the chandelier light. He had never touched a real piano before, but somehow, his fingers knew where they belonged. In the corner of his eye, Noah saw movement. The hotel manager had spotted him and was walking over, face stern and determined. Noah knew he had only seconds before he would be escorted out into the rain. He placed his fingers on the keys, the way he'd seen the pianist do, the way he'd practiced 1,000 times on tabletops and paper drawings. The manager was getting closer, just a few steps away now. Noah took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and pressed down. A perfect chord rang out through the lobby, clear as a bell and twice as beautiful. The hotel manager stopped mid-step. Noah opened his eyes, the sound still vibrating through his chest, through his fingertips, through his very soul. For the first time in his life, Noah knew exactly what to do next. His hands began to move, finding keys they had never touched before but somehow always known. And what happened next would change everything. The first note hung in the air like a question. Noah's finger trembled slightly as it lifted from the key. The hotel manager, Mr. Wilson according to his name tag, stood frozen mid-step, his face a mix of surprise and something Noah couldn't quite read. For a heartbeat, the busy lobby seemed to pause. A few heads turned toward the piano, then turned away again, expecting nothing unusual from the hotel's centerpiece. Noah's heart pounded so hard he was sure Mr. Wilson could hear it. He should run now before he got in trouble. He should apologize for touching something so expensive, so out of his reach. He should. His fingers moved on their own, finding a second key, then a third. The notes weren't random. They were the beginning of a melody that had lived in Noah's head for months, something he'd heard through the open windows of the music academy. Something that made his chest ache with feelings he couldn't name. Mr. Wilson's stern expression shifted, his eyebrows rising slightly. He took another step forward but didn't immediately order Noah away from the piano. Instead he watched, head tilted as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Young man," he began, his voice quieter than Noah expected. "Do you have permission to—" Noah's hands found more keys and the melody grew stronger. The rain outside beat against the tall windows, providing a soft rhythm to accompany his playing. He wasn't thinking anymore, he was feeling, remembering, letting the music he'd stored in his mind pour out through his fingertips. The piece was something Noah had heard a man play at the music academy 3 weeks ago. Noah had stood outside in the cold for almost an hour, listening through a cracked window as the pianist practiced the same song over and over. At the time, Noah had closed his eyes, his fingers twitching at his sides, imagining what it would feel like to create those sounds himself. Now he knew. It felt like flying. It felt like speaking a language he'd always understood but never been allowed to use. Mr. Wilson took another step closer, then stopped again. His hand, which had been raised to tap Noah on the shoulder, slowly lowered to his side. The frown lines on his forehead deepened, but not in anger, in confusion and wonder. "How are you?" he began, but didn't finish the question. Noah barely heard him. The music carried him away from the fancy hotel, away from his wet clothes and empty stomach, away from the shelter and the worried looks adults gave him when they thought he couldn't see. For these precious moments, nothing existed except the keys beneath his fingers and the melody flowing through him. He made mistakes. Of course he did. His untrained hands sometimes landed on wrong notes and his timing wasn't perfect. But there was something in his playing that went beyond technique, something that came from a place of pure understanding. Noah played the way birds fly, not because they were taught, but because they were born to do it. A small crowd had begun to gather, though Noah didn't notice. A woman in a business suit stopped mid-call, her phone still held to her ear, but her attention completely captured by the boy at the piano. An elderly couple paused on their way to the elevator, the husband leaning heavily on his cane. A bellhop stood with luggage cart forgotten at his side. "Who is that kid?" someone whispered. "Is he with the music program?" asked another. Mr. Wilson didn't answer them. He couldn't, because he had no idea who this soaking wet boy was or how he could play like that, with soul and understanding that many trained adults never achieved. The song reached a difficult part, a section where the notes tumbled over each other like water down a rocky stream. Noah slowed down, his forehead wrinkling in concentration. His small hands stretched to reach the right keys, and for a moment it seemed he might stumble. Then something remarkable happened. Noah closed his eyes and let his ears guide him. The melody didn't falter. If anything, it grew more beautiful, more personal. He wasn't copying anymore. He was interpreting, adding his own feelings to the music. The hotel's regular pianist, Ted, returned from his break, coffee cup in hand. He stopped dead when he heard the music, nearly spilling his drink. His eyes widened as he saw who was sitting at his piano. He pushed through the small crowd that had formed, coming to stand beside Mr. Wilson. "Who is this kid?" Ted whispered. "Where did he study?" Mr. Wilson shook his head slightly. "I don't think he has." "That's impossible," Ted replied. "He's playing Chopin. No one just sits down and plays Chopin." Yet there Noah was, doing exactly that. The piece reached its end, the final notes fading like the last raindrops after a storm. For a moment Noah sat still, eyes closed, hands hovering above the keys. The feeling of the music still echoed through him, leaving him both empty and more full than he'd ever been. When he finally opened his eyes, he gasped. At least 20 people stood around the piano watching him. Mr. Wilson was closest, his stern expression replaced by astonishment. Beside him stood another man in a hotel uniform, the pianist whose place Noah had taken. Reality came crashing back. Noah was a soaking wet nobody who had touched an expensive piano without permission. His hands jerked away from the keys as if they'd suddenly become hot. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, standing up so fast he nearly knocked over the bench. "I didn't mean to, I just wanted to. I'll go now." He tried to step away from the piano but found his path blocked by the crowd. Panic fluttered in his chest. Would they call the police? Would they make him pay for touching the piano? He had no money, nothing of value except the few school books in his backpack. "Wait," said Mr. Wilson, finding his voice at last. "Just wait a moment." Noah froze, his eyes darting toward the exit. The rain outside had eased to a drizzle, but he wasn't thinking about getting wet anymore. "Where did you learn to play like that?" asked the hotel pianist, Ted, his voice gentle but bewildered. Noah stared at his worn-out sneakers. "Nowhere. I don't—" He took a deep breath. "I've never played before." "Not really." A murmur ran through the small crowd. Noah heard disbelief in their whispers, saw it in their faces when he dared to glance up. "Never?" Ted repeated. "You've never had lessons?" Noah shook his head. "I just listen. At the music school sometimes, through the windows. And on the radio. He didn't know how to explain that the music made perfect sense to him, that he could hear a piece once and remember it, note for note, that his fingers seemed to know what to do even if his mind didn't. "Play something else," said a woman in the crowd. Noah looked up, startled. The woman wore an elegant blue dress and had kind eyes. She smiled encouragingly at him. Please, she added. If you'd like to. Noah looked at Mr. Wilson, expecting to be told to leave. Instead, the manager nodded slightly, gesturing toward the piano bench. Go ahead, he said. One more. Hardly believing what was happening, Noah sat down again. His clothes were beginning to dry in the warm lobby, making them stiff and uncomfortable, but he barely noticed. The piano keys gleamed under the chandelier light, inviting him back. What should he play? Noah's mind raced through all the pieces he'd heard and loved. Something to show them he hadn't just gotten lucky, something to make them understand what music meant to him. His hands found the keys once more. This time he chose a piece he'd heard just last week, when a young woman had been practicing at the music academy. It was faster than the Chopin, with more energy, more joy. Noah wasn't sure who had written it, but he knew how it made him feel, like running through an open field on the first warm day of spring. As the first bright notes filled the lobby, Ted's mouth fell open. That's Mozart, he whispered to Mr. Wilson. Sonata in C major, and he's playing it almost perfectly. The crowd grew larger. A family with 2 small children stopped to listen, the children's eyes wide as they watched someone not much older than them create such beautiful sounds. Hotel staff paused in their duties, standing at the edges of the gathering. A businessman who had been complaining loudly about his room at the front desk fell silent mid-sentence, turning to see what everyone was watching, and through it all, Noah played. His fear began to melt away with each note. For the first time in his life, people were looking at him not with pity or indifference, but with wonder. For the first time, he wasn't invisible. The music flowed through his fingers, telling a story without words. Noah added little flourishes that weren't in the original piece, small touches that made it his own. And as he played, something shifted in the air around him, something that felt like possibility. The final notes of Mozart's sonata faded into the hushed lobby. Noah's hands hovered above the keys for a moment before coming to rest in his lap. The silence that followed felt different from any silence he had ever known. It was alive, electric, full of something he couldn't name. Then the applause began. Gentle at first, a few pairs of hands clapping in surprise and delight. Then louder as more people joined in. Noah looked up, startled by the sound. The small crowd had grown to at least 40 people, hotel guests and staff alike, all watching him with expressions that ranged from amazement to disbelief. Noah felt his face grow warm. No one had ever applauded for him before. He didn't know what to do, so he just sat there, hands twisted together in his lap, eyes darting between the shiny piano keys and the blur of faces surrounding him. Remarkable, someone said, loud enough to be heard over the clapping. Absolutely remarkable. The voice belonged to a tall woman at the edge of the crowd. She wore a simple black coat, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She didn't smile like the others, but there was something intense in her gaze that made Noah feel both seen and slightly afraid. Thank you, Noah said quietly, though he wasn't sure anyone could hear him over the noise. He started to stand up, thinking he should probably leave now, before someone remembered he didn't belong here. Wait, said Ted, the hotel pianist. Please. He stepped closer to the piano, a look of genuine curiosity on his face. What else can you play? Noah hesitated, surprised by the question. I don't know. Lots of things, I guess. Whatever I've heard. Ted's eyebrows shot up. Whatever you've heard? Once, twice. Noah shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. Just, when I hear something, I remember it. The sounds stay in my head. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The woman in the black coat took a step closer. Would you mind if I asked you something? Ted said, his voice gentle. When Noah nodded hesitantly, Ted sat down beside him on the bench, careful to leave enough space between them. When you play, what do you see in your mind? It was a strange question, and Noah had to think about it. No one had ever asked him about the music in his head before. No one had known it was there. Colors sometimes, he said finally, and feelings, like the Chopin piece feels blue and silver, like rain on a window, and sad but not a bad sad, more like, he struggled to find the words, like remembering something beautiful that's gone. Ted's eyes widened slightly. He exchanged a look with Mr. Wilson, who stood nearby, still watching Noah with that puzzled expression. And the Mozart? Ted asked. A small smile tugged at Noah's lips, yellow and gold, like sunshine. It feels like running and laughing. The woman in the black coat was definitely moving closer now, making her way through the crowd with purpose. Noah noticed her approach and felt a flicker of unease. Adults who looked that serious usually meant trouble. "What about this?" Ted asked and played a short sequence of notes, just a few seconds of music, a melody Noah had never heard before. Without thinking, Noah repeated it perfectly, his small fingers finding the exact keys Ted had pressed. The crowd's reaction was immediate, gasps and whispers, a few people shaking their heads in disbelief. Even Mr. Wilson's stern face had transformed into open astonishment. "Perfect pitch," the woman in the black coat said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. She had reached the front of the crowd now and stood just a few feet from the piano, and an exceptional auditory memory. Noah didn't know what those words meant, but the way she said them made them sound important. He shifted uncomfortably on the bench, suddenly very aware of his damp clothes and messy hair. "May I?" the woman asked, gesturing to the piano. Ted nodded and stood up, giving her his place on the bench beside Noah. Up close, Noah could see that she was older than he'd first thought. Lines framed her eyes and mouth, and her hands, when she placed them on the keys, showed blue veins beneath thin skin. But there was nothing fragile about the way she sat, straight-backed and confident. "My name is Dr. Bell," she said, looking directly at Noah. "I teach music theory at Westbrook University." Noah's eyes widened. The university was a place he'd seen only from a distance, a collection of grand old buildings on a hill across town. "I'm Noah," he replied, his voice small. Dr. Bell nodded once as if confirming something to herself. Then, without warning, she began to play. A complicated piece with her right hand, something dark and stormy that Noah had never heard before. "Can you repeat that?" she asked when she finished. Noah swallowed hard, feeling the weight of all the watching eyes, but when he placed his hands on the keys, the nervousness faded. He replayed the piece nearly perfectly, stumbling only once on a particularly tricky section. Dr. Bell's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. She played another piece, this time using both hands, something light and delicate that danced up and down the keyboard. Again, Noah repeated it, this time without any mistakes. The lobby had grown so quiet you could hear the rain pattering against the windows. No one moved. No one spoke. All eyes were on the strange pair at the piano, the elegant professor and the small, damp boy with the extraordinary gift. "One more," Dr. Bell said, and this time she played something so complex that several people in the crowd exchanged doubtful glances. Her fingers flew across the keys, creating layers of melody and harmony that seemed impossible for anyone to memorize after a single hearing. When she finished, she turned to Noah with a raised eyebrow. A challenge. Noah took a deep breath and began to play. The first few measures came easily, his fingers finding the patterns Dr. Bell had created. Then came a particularly difficult section, and he slowed down slightly, his forehead wrinkling in concentration. A tiny smile appeared on Dr. Bell's face. Noah pressed on, navigating the complicated piece with surprising skill. There were mistakes, a wrong note here, a timing issue there, but the essence of the music remained intact. When he reached the final measures, his confidence grew, and he finished with a flourish that made several people in the crowd break into spontaneous applause. Dr. Bell didn't applaud. Instead, she looked at Noah with an intensity that made him want to squirm. "How old are you, Noah?" she asked. 12, he answered. "Almost 13. And you've never had piano lessons?" Noah shook his head. "Never played any instrument at all?" "No, ma'am." Dr. Bell was silent for a moment, studying him. "In 40 years of teaching music," she said finally, "I have never encountered anyone quite like you." Noah didn't know what to say to that. He looked down at his hands, suddenly aware of the dirt under his fingernails, the small cut on his thumb from where he'd caught it on a fence yesterday. "Where are your parents?" Dr. Bell asked, her voice softer now. "Are they here with you?" The question brought reality crashing back. Noah's stomach tightened. He glanced toward the exit, calculating how quickly he could reach it. "They're not here," he said carefully. Mr. Wilson stepped closer. "Young man, we should call your parents to let them know where you are. They must be worried." Noah's eyes dropped to his lap again. "My mom's working," he lied. "She won't be done until late." It wasn't entirely false. His mother was working, had been working double shifts at the diner for months now, trying to save enough for an apartment. But the truth was more complicated. The truth involved social workers and temporary placements and nights spent at the shelter. when there was nowhere else to go. Something in Noah's expression must have given him away, because Dr. Bell and Mr. Wilson exchanged a look loaded with unspoken understanding. "Perhaps we could get you something to eat while you wait," Dr. Bell suggested, her tone casual but her eyes sharp and observant. "The hotel cafe makes an excellent hot chocolate. Perfect for a rainy day." Noah's stomach growled at the mention of food. He hadn't eaten since the free breakfast at school, but pride made him hesitate. "I don't have any money," he admitted. "My treat," Mr. Wilson said, surprising Noah. The stern hotel manager's face had softened considerably. "Consider it payment for the impromptu concert you've given our guests." A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd, which had begun to disperse now that the performance seemed to be over. Several people smiled at Noah as they walked away, a few nodding in appreciation. "I couldn't possibly," Noah began. "I insist," Mr. Wilson said, in a tone that suggested he wasn't used to being refused. "Ted, would you show our young pianist to the cafe?" "Order him whatever he wants." Ted nodded, smiling warmly at Noah. "It would be my pleasure." "Come on, Noah. Their chocolate cake is almost as impressive as your playing." As Noah stood up from the piano bench, his legs felt shaky. Too much had happened too quickly, and he didn't know what to make of any of it. He followed Ted toward the cafe, acutely aware of Dr. Bell watching him go, her expression thoughtful. What Noah couldn't know was that as he walked away, Dr. Bell turned to Mr. Wilson and said quietly, "That boy has more natural talent than most of my graduate students. It would be criminal to let it go to waste." And Mr. Wilson, who had run the Grand Palace Hotel for 15 years and prided himself on his proper judgment of character, nodded in solemn agreement. "What can be done?" he asked. Dr. Bell's eyes never left Noah's retreating figure. "I'm not sure yet," she replied. "But something must be done." The hotel cafe was nothing like the places Noah usually ate. Soft lighting came from fancy glass lamps hanging from the ceiling. Each table had a small vase with a single fresh flower. The chairs had cushions. Noah sat stiffly, afraid to touch anything that might get dirty from his still damp clothes. Ted sat across from him, watching with quiet amusement as Noah's eyes widened at the menu. "Everything is okay?" Ted asked. Noah nodded quickly, though okay didn't begin to cover it. He'd never seen so many kinds of cake in one place. His eyes kept returning to a chocolate one with 3 layers and what looked like cherries on top. "That's a good choice," Ted said, following Noah's gaze. "The Black Forest cake. It's my favorite, too." When the waitress came, Ted ordered 2 slices of the cake and hot chocolate for Noah. "Just coffee for me," he added. "I'm still on my shift." While they waited, Ted leaned forward, his expression curious. "So, Noah, tell me more about this music you hear in your head. How long have you been able to do that?" Noah shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. "Always, I guess. As long as I can remember." He fidgeted with the napkin in front of him, folding it into smaller and smaller squares. "And you really never had any lessons? Not even at school?" "My school doesn't have music anymore. Budget cuts." Noah didn't add that he'd changed schools 4 times in the past 2 years, as his mom tried to find steady work and stable housing. Ted shook his head in disbelief. "It's extraordinary, you know, what you can do. Most pianists study for years to play like that." Noah didn't know what to say to that. He'd never thought of his ability as anything special. It was just something that happened in his head, like the way some kids could draw really well or do math problems without writing them down. Their food arrived, saving him from having to respond. Noah stared at the cake slice placed in front of him. It was huge, with layers of chocolate and cream and dark cherries that glistened in the light. The hot chocolate came in a big mug with whipped cream on top. "Go ahead," Ted encouraged. "You've earned it." Noah didn't need to be told twice. He took a bite of the cake and couldn't hold back a smile as the flavors exploded in his mouth. Rich chocolate, sweet cream, the slight tartness of the cherries, it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. Ted smiled, watching him eat. "Dr. Bell was very impressed, you know." Noah paused mid-bite. "She was? Oh, yes. She doesn't show it much, that's just her way. But I could tell. Dr. Bell doesn't waste time on people without real talent." Noah took a sip of hot chocolate, trying to process this information. A professional musician thought he had talent. The idea made his stomach flutter with something that felt like hope. "Is she famous?" he asked. Ted nodded. In certain circles, yes. She was a concert pianist before she started teaching, performed all over the world. Now she runs the music department at the university and picks maybe 2 or 3 students each year for her special program. Noah was about to ask another question when he noticed something strange happening in the cafe. People were coming in, not to eat, but to look at him. They stood near the entrance, whispering to each other and pointing discreetly in his direction. "What's going on?" he asked Ted, suddenly self-conscious. Ted glanced over his shoulder. "Word travels fast in a hotel. I think people heard about what happened in the lobby." As if to confirm this, a woman approached their table, smiling nervously. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you the boy who was playing the piano earlier?" Noah nodded hesitantly. "It was beautiful," she said. "My husband and I were checking in and we heard you from across the lobby. Would you be playing again later? We'd love to hear more." Before Noah could answer, Ted spoke up. "That would be up to Mr. Wilson. And Noah, of course." The woman smiled again and returned to her companion, who stood waiting by the door. More people were gathering now, peering into the cafe with curious expressions. Noah's face felt hot. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. Usually he tried his hardest to be invisible. It was safer that way, especially when you wore the same clothes too many days in a row or couldn't afford lunch like the other kids. "Looks like you're becoming a bit of a celebrity," Ted said with a gentle smile. "How does it feel?" Noah poked at his cake with his fork. "Weird," he admitted. "I don't understand why everyone cares so much. I just played some songs." Ted was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was serious. "What you did wasn't just playing some songs, Noah. It was remarkable. People spend years learning to play like that. Decades. Some never get there at all." Noah looked up, surprised by Ted's tone. "Music speaks to people," Ted continued. "Real music, played with soul, with understanding, it's rare. That's why they're all interested. You gave them something beautiful and unexpected. That doesn't happen every day." Before Noah could respond, there was a commotion at the cafe entrance. Mr. Wilson appeared, accompanied by Dr. Bell and a man Noah hadn't seen before, tall and well-dressed, with a camera hanging around his neck. "There he is," Mr. Wilson said, pointing toward their table. Noah instinctively shrank in his seat. Adults looking for him, talking about him when he wasn't there. In his experience, that usually meant trouble. But when they reached the table, Mr. Wilson was smiling. "Noah, Dr. Bell has had an idea. And this gentleman is Mr. Chen from the Westbrook Daily News. He'd like to take your picture, if that's all right." Noah nearly choked on his hot chocolate. "My picture? For the newspaper?" Dr. Bell pulled up a chair and sat down, her posture perfect, hands folded on the table. "Mr. Chen was here covering the mayor's business luncheon when he heard about your impromptu performance. The newspaper is always looking for positive local stories." The photographer smiled kindly at Noah. "It's not every day a young musical prodigy appears out of nowhere in our city." Noah felt his chest tighten. This was all happening too fast. "I'm not a prodigy," he said quietly. Dr. Bell raised an eyebrow. "You played complex classical pieces after hearing them once with no formal training. If that's not the definition of a prodigy, I don't know what is." "But I can't be in the newspaper," Noah protested, panic rising in his throat. "My mom doesn't know I'm here. She'd be mad." That wasn't exactly true, but it was simpler than explaining the complicated reality of his situation. The adults exchanged glances. Mr. Chen lowered his camera slightly. "Perhaps we should call your mother," Dr. Bell suggested. "I'm sure she'd be proud to know about your gift." Noah's hands twisted in his lap. "You can't," he said. "She's working. You can't call her at work." Another look passed between the adults, the kind Noah had seen many times before, when grown-ups suspected something wasn't quite right but weren't sure what to do about it. Dr. Bell leaned forward slightly. "Noah," she said, her voice gentler than before, "where do you live?" The question hung in the air between them. Noah stared at his half-eaten cake, unable to meet her eyes. How could he explain that where he lived wasn't a simple question? That sometimes it was his mom's friend's apartment, sometimes a cousin's place, and sometimes the shelter when those options fell through? He was saved from answering by a sudden burst of excited voices from the lobby. The sound grew louder, drawing everyone's attention. "What's going on out there?" Mr. Wilson wondered, rising from his seat to look. Through the cafe doorway, Noah could see a crowd gathering in the lobby again, bigger than before, with people holding up phones, taking pictures and videos. Some wore rain-spotted coats, suggesting they had just come in from outside. "Looks like word has spread beyond the hotel," Ted remarked, sounding surprised. Mr. Wilson excused himself and went to investigate. He returned a moment later looking slightly bewildered. "It seems someone posted a video of Noah playing on social media. It's getting quite a lot of attention. There are people asking if he'll be performing again." Noah's eyes widened. "A video of me?" Mr. Chen nodded. "That's how news travels these days. Someone catches a special moment, shares it online, and suddenly everyone wants to see for themselves." Dr. Bell considered this development, tapping one finger thoughtfully against the table. "This could be an opportunity," she said almost to herself. Then turning to Noah, "Would you be willing to play again? Properly this time on the stage in the hotel's event room?" Noah's heart began to race. "On a stage? In front of all those people? The grand piano in there is even better than the one in the lobby," Ted said encouragingly. Concert quality, Noah swallowed hard. Part of him wanted to run straight out the door and never look back. But another part, a part that had been quiet for so long, wanted to touch those keys again, to feel the music flow through his fingers and into the world. I don't know," he said. Dr. Bell watched him carefully. "It's your choice, Noah. But I think people would love to hear you play, and it might be the start of something important for you." Mr. Wilson nodded. "The event room isn't being used until tonight's dinner. We could set up an impromptu recital for, say, an hour. No charge, of course." Ted grinned at Noah. "What do you say? Ready for your first official performance?" Noah looked from face to face. Ted's encouraging smile, Dr. Bell's intense gaze, Mr. Chen's curious expression, Mr. Wilson's unexpected kindness. Then he glanced toward the lobby where strangers had gathered just to see him, just to hear him play. For a boy who had spent most of his life trying to be invisible, it was overwhelming, terrifying, but also thrilling. "Okay," he said finally, his voice small but steady. "I'll do it." Dr. Bell's face broke into a rare smile. "Excellent, Mr. Wilson. Shall we make the arrangements?" As the adults began discussing logistics, Noah sat quietly, finishing his hot chocolate. Through the cafe doorway, he could see more people arriving, shaking rain from their coats, looking expectantly around the lobby. They were coming to hear him play. Him, Noah Thompson, the kid no one had ever noticed before today. For the first time in his life, Noah felt like he might be someone worth noticing. The Grand Palace Hotel's event room was designed to hold 200 people. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, it was standing room only. Noah peeked through the slightly open door, his heart hammering against his ribs. The crowd was far bigger than he had expected. Hotel guests, staff, and people from town who had seen the videos online and rushed over to witness the phenomenon for themselves. "I can't do this," he whispered, backing away from the door. "There are too many people." Ted stood behind him, a reassuring presence in the chaos that the afternoon had become. "You played for a crowd in the lobby," he reminded Noah gently. "That was different. I didn't know anyone was listening, not at first." Noah's hands were shaking. He shoved them into his pockets. "What if I mess up? What if I can't remember the music?" Ted placed a hand lightly on Noah's shoulder. "You won't mess up. And even if you did, no one would care. They're here because what you can do is special. They want to be part of something extraordinary." Noah took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing pulse. Through the crack in the door, he could see the first few rows of seats. A woman sat there with 2 young children, all 3 leaning forward with excitement. Behind them, an elderly man with a cane tapped his foot impatiently, waiting for the show to begin. People from all walks of life gathered in one room for him. "Is your mother coming?" Ted asked quietly. Noah looked at his shoes. "I called and left a message at her work. But she's probably busy." The truth was, he wasn't sure the message would reach her. His mom worked back-to-back shifts at 2 different jobs, and the diner where she spent her afternoons didn't always pass along phone messages right away. A small frown creased Ted's forehead. But before he could say anything more, Dr. Bell appeared. Her usual stern expression softened by what might have been excitement. "They're getting restless out there," she said. "Are you ready, Noah?" No, he wasn't ready. How could anyone be ready for something like this? But Noah nodded anyway, squaring his shoulders like he'd seen brave people do in movies. Dr. Bell studied him for a moment, then did something unexpected. She knelt down so they were eye to eye, her knees cracking slightly as she lowered herself. "Listen to me," she said, her voice low and serious. "What you're about to do takes courage. But the music will carry you through it. Once your hands touch those keys, nothing else will matter. Do you understand?" Noah looked into her eyes, gray and clear and certain, and found himself nodding again, this time with more conviction. "Good." Dr. Bell stood up, brushing invisible dust from her black coat. "Now Mr. Wilson is going to introduce you, and then you'll walk out to the piano. Take your time. Sit down, collect yourself, and when you're ready, play." Noah swallowed hard. "What should I play?" A hint of a smile touched Dr. Bell's lips. "Whatever you feel. This is your moment." Then she was gone, slipping through the door to take her seat in the front row. Noah heard the murmur of the crowd grow louder, then quieter as Mr. Wilson stepped onto the small stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the hotel manager began, his voice carrying easily through the packed room. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. We have something truly special to share with you today. A young talent discovered quite by accident in our very own lobby just a few hours ago." Noah closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing as Mr. Wilson continued. "This young man has never had a single piano lesson. He has never studied music formally. Yet what you are about to hear defies explanation. I won't say anything more. I'll let his music speak for itself. Please welcome Noah Thompson." The applause started before Noah even opened the door. It washed over him like a wave as he stepped into the room, momentarily stopping his breath. Hundreds of faces turned toward him, hundreds of pairs of hands clapping, some people even standing. The walk to the piano seemed to take forever. Noah felt disconnected from his body, as if he were floating above the scene, watching himself move across the stage. The grand piano waited for him, its lid propped fully open, its black surface gleaming under the lights. Noah sat down on the bench, adjusting it slightly as he'd seen Ted do earlier. The keys stretched before him, white and black, familiar yet intimidating in this new setting. The applause died down. Silence filled the room, expectant, heavy with anticipation. For a terrible moment, Noah's mind went blank. Every piece of music he'd ever heard seemed to vanish from his memory, leaving nothing but panic in its place. He stared at the keys, frozen. Then he looked up and saw Dr. Bell in the front row. She didn't smile or nod or give him any sign of encouragement. She simply watched, her gaze steady and confident. Beside her sat Ted, who did smile, a small, reassuring smile that seemed to say, "I believe in you." And suddenly, Noah knew what to play. He placed his fingers on the keys and began with the very first piece he'd played in the lobby, the Chopin nocturne that had started everything. The notes flowed from his fingers, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. The music filled the room, wrapping around the audience like a spell, drawing them into its story. When he finished the nocturne, there was a moment of perfect silence before the applause erupted, louder this time, punctuated by a few gasps and murmured exclamations. Noah didn't wait for it to die down before beginning his next piece, the Mozart sonata that had cemented the crowd's amazement earlier. He played with more freedom now, adding his own subtle variations to the classical piece, letting the music breathe through him. His small hands moved across the keys with surprising dexterity, finding melodies and harmonies that spoke directly to the hearts of his listeners. As the final notes of the Mozart faded away, Noah glanced toward the door at the back of the room, hoping, despite himself, to see his mother's face among the crowd. But the doorway remained empty of any familiar figure. Pushing away the disappointment, Noah turned back to the piano and launched into a third piece, something livelier this time. A piece he'd heard on the radio that made people tap their feet and smile. The audience responded immediately, some nodding in time with the music, others exchanging delighted glances. Noah played for nearly an hour, moving from one piece to another as they came to him. Classical compositions, film scores, even a popular song that had been playing in shops around town. With each piece, his confidence grew. The nervousness that had nearly paralyzed him before his first note had completely vanished, replaced by a joy so pure it seemed to radiate from him. When he finally finished, the audience rose as one, the applause thunderous in the packed room. Someone called out, "Bravo!" and others took up the cry. Noah stood from the bench, his legs shaky, and gave an awkward bow as Ted had instructed him to do. As he straightened up, he saw something that made his heart leap. A woman standing in the doorway at the back of the room, still wearing her waitress uniform, her eyes wide with astonishment. "Mom," Noah whispered, too quietly for anyone to hear. Before he could move toward her, Dr. Bell was beside him on the stage, a hand on his shoulder as she addressed the crowd. "What you've witnessed today is extraordinary," she said, her voice carrying easily over the gradually quieting applause. "Noah Thompson has a rare gift, one that deserves to be nurtured and developed." She turned to look at Noah, and there was real warmth in her eyes now. "Which is why I'm pleased to announce that the Westbrook University Music Department would like to offer Noah a full scholarship to our Young Artists program." Beginning immediately, a fresh wave of applause broke out. Noah stared at Dr. Bell in disbelief. "A scholarship?" he repeated, not sure he had heard correctly. She nodded. "Lessons, materials, everything you need. We've never offered this to someone your age before, but exceptions must be made for exceptional talent." Noah's mind reeled. Lessons, real lessons with real teachers, on real pianos, not just snatched moments through open windows or imagined melodies played on tabletops. "There's more," Dr. Bell continued, turning back to the audience. "Thanks to the generosity of Mr. Wilson and the Grand Palace Hotel, a fund has been established to support Noah's continued education and living expenses." Mr. Wilson stepped forward. "When we posted the video of Noah playing, it went viral almost instantly. People have been asking how they can help since the moment we announced this impromptu recital. In just the past hour, we've received pledges totaling over $15,000. Noah felt his knees go weak. He looked toward the back of the room again and saw his mother pushing through the crowd, tears streaming down her face as she made her way toward the stage. "The fund will be managed by the university," Mr. Wilson continued, "ensuring that Noah and his family have stable housing and that his mother can reduce her work hours to support his musical development." As his mother reached the stage, Noah ran to her, nearly tripping in his haste. She caught him in her arms, holding him so tightly he could barely breathe. "I'm so sorry I was late," she whispered against his hair. "They just gave me your message. I came as fast as I could. Did you hear me play?" Noah asked, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "Just the end. But it was beautiful. So beautiful." She pulled back slightly, cupping his face in her hands. "Why didn't you tell me you could play like that?" Noah shrugged, suddenly shy. "I never had a real piano to try?" His mother looked past him to where Dr. Bell and Mr. Wilson stood, watching their reunion with gentle smiles. "Is it true?" she asked them. "The scholarship? The fund?" Dr. Bell nodded. "Your son has a gift that comes along perhaps once in a generation. It would be a privilege to help him develop it. We'll help with housing arrangements as well," Mr. Wilson added. "There's an apartment building near the university that's owned by my brother-in-law. I've already spoken with him." Noah's mother's hands trembled as she brushed hair from Noah's forehead. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Dr. Bell suggested with a rare smile. "Say yes, and let's see just how far this remarkable boy can go." As applause filled the room once more, Noah looked out at the sea of faces, strangers who had become supporters in the space of a single afternoon. He looked at Ted, who gave him a thumbs up from the side of the stage. He looked at Mr. Wilson, whose stern face had softened into genuine kindness, and he looked at his mother, who was nodding through her tears, saying, "Yes, yes, of course, yes." In the space of a few hours, everything had changed, all because he had dared to touch a piano, to reach for something beautiful that had seemed impossibly out of reach. Noah Thompson, the boy no one had noticed yesterday, had been seen at last, not for his worn clothes or his circumstances, but for the music that had always lived inside him, waiting for its chance to be heard. As he stood on the stage with his mother's arm around his shoulders, Noah finally understood what Dr. Bell had meant. The music had indeed carried him through, not just through the performance, but to somewhere new, somewhere he could finally belong.